Hello, hi, Jeffrey Kin, Sarasota Rising, Living Arts Festival, Sarasota. Welcome to Behind the Masterpiece, a great conversation that we have with our arts practitioners in our area for Visit Sarasota, and we love that you're here and that you're listening and watching. Today, I'm super excited because it's very rare that I have to ask an artist how to pronounce certain words, and we're going to be talking to an artist that is probably knows more about Johann Vermeer than anyone would ever want to know. I'm talking with Joe Fig. Hello, Joe. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you, Jeffrey, for having me on.
It is.
Lot of pressure pushing on me on my Vermeer knowledge, but
Sorry, there
happy to
is
share as much as I can.
there. No, no. There's going to be a question and answer period, and
Okay.
I'm going to you if you get an answer wrong because I'm not actually. I'm not. But I was really super excited to do a little research on you and see your work, and I find it fascinating. So we're talking to Joe because you have a solo exhibition at the Sarasota Art Museum that is opening November 17th and running through April 13th. And I'm sure that's no easy feat, is to have a solo exhibition somewhere. How did that come about?
I've been very fortunate to be a practicing artist for the last 30 or so years, and have other prior museum and gallery exhibitions. This particular exhibition is a bit unique for me, in that it's a body of work that's focusing exclusively on one exhibition. So for the past 8 or so years, I've been making what I call my Contemplation Series of paintings, which are small scale images of people contemplating art in museums and galleries. Um, and so a year ago, the blockbuster Vermeer show was at the Rijksmuseum, and the show sold out in 2 days.
Wow.
And so I was fortunate enough to get tickets, and I went over there with the intention of maybe making one or two paintings based on certain Vermeer images and people contemplating those images in a museum. But since it not would be, it is the last time those many Vermeers would be together.
Oh,
There were 25 out of the 35. I'm sorry, 28 out of the 35 known Vermeers in one place, and they'll never have that many lent again. So it really was a once in a lifetime exhibition. And so while I was there, the way the exhibition design was beautifully laid out with a lot of space between each painting, and then each painting had its own kind of color scheme and area with sort of very deep, rich colored walls of either reds, greens, or blues with heavy drapes on either side. It was a very unique experience. And they also limited the number of people who would get in. So it wasn't necessarily crowded. So they did an excellent job with the exhibition design. And so there's so many great Vermeers, and I've been very fortunate growing up in New York, where there are, I believe, 8 Vermeers, a bunch at the Metropolitan Museum and a few at the Frick, which is, I guess, almost about a third of his output, if I think of it that way. But to see them all together and then see a bunch of other of his paintings, which I haven't got to see, it was just a beautifully designed exhibition. So I decided, instead of just doing one painting or two paintings, I would try to, through a series of 16 paintings, which include 18 Vermeers, encapsulate sort of a broader view of the exhibition for all those who couldn't go.
wow. I love the fact that you went in with the idea. My brain starts going, "Oh, I'm going to go," and then, wow, these people are watching, looking at this piece and they're really interesting. So what gave you the idea walking in that you knew that you were going to watch the people view Vermeer's paintings?
So contemplation has been a big theme of my work going back many years. And so originally that started off with my work is primarily focused on the creative process, the artist studio, and the spaces where art is contemplated. And my earlier work, which were miniature sculptures of artists in their studios, often contemplating their work in their studios. And in my I've probably interviewed about 150 artists. one of the questions I ask them is, when you're contemplating your work, how do you sit or stand? It's that moment of contemplation where it seems the artist, or anyone really who's contemplating, seems like they're doing the least amount of work, which is really where they're working the hardest. And so initially the work started off with artists contemplating the work, and then once work is out, seeing work in a artist studio or in your own studio, it's a very different experience than having the work out in public. Once it's out in the public, it's in a way no longer yours. And really, what you want as an artist is to just have people take more than a passing glance and appreciate the work you're doing. So I was fortunate to have some work in museums, and I started watching how people were looking at the work, and appreciating. The artist needs the viewer. Um, we need the viewer, and so in a way,
Right.
they're an homage to the viewer, as well as just, again, watching how people stand, their body language, their posture, and even in the broader sense of thinking of portraiture, which has been a sort of my overarching theme, I guess. How do you make portraiture contemporary? You could often, with portraiture, we think of the face
Right.
and recognition, but
Right.
you people have recognized other people within the paintings just by their stance, and all these paintings primarily show people from the back.
Yeah,
Uh,
I noticed that, and I just so you know, I love body language. As a theater director, I will often
oh,
say the words we don't care about the words, but your body language isn't conveying what you're thinking, or it isn't conveying your heart. So I love this, and I always love it when I'm in an interview and someone crosses their arms, and that
yes.
instantly makes me think, "Oh wow, there something's up there," you know. So I'm entranced with the fact that you were. Did any of these people know what you were doing? Did they know that you were watching them?
No. So
Okay,
so the when museums and galleries, where primarily all my work, my paintings take place, they're public spaces, and they're so preoccupied with looking at the works. And there's so many people in these places that have their cameras out taking pictures. They're not really giving me a second thought. The only
so
time really where it's been an issue is certain museums do have policies where you're not allowed to photograph.
I was
Uh,
just gonna say that because I remember I forget where I was at. Oh, I was at a, Basquiat exhibit in New York, and they're like, "Put your phone away," and I'm like, "Oh my god, I really wanted to take a picture here."
mhm.
So yeah, so you have to pay attention to that too. I noticed that your works are so detailed. That's actually something that I thought about. I was like, "Does he have a photograph? Like, do you initially take a photo, or how do you remember the bodies and the stances, uh,
Yeah.
so
So,
well?"
yes, I've been working with photography for my entire career. It's that firsthand experience which is really important to me. So the way I compose, these are very composed images, and so they look like um, a natural scene in a museum, and sometimes the image, there's usually one person who's maybe an anchor there, but being when I was in school, being trained as an artist, there weren't many figurative painters, and all my professors at the time were as coming out of abstraction. And so, even though they're figurative paintings, I look at them as more sort of the formal elements. So obviously after the content of the painting in there, the people, what I do is then I bring all that into Photoshop, and I start moving the people around to create a composition. And I'm very conscious of, you're talking about performance in theater, how the bend of an elbow, negative space, how much moving an image, a person over an eighth of an inch
Mhm.
impacts the composition in that form. So I spend most of the time working on getting a solid composition, and that's thinking again sort of the formal qualities of it. And then once I have that, then I project the image onto my wall with the overhead projector. And if you move the projector back and forth, if you move it closer, the image gets smaller. If you move it further back, it gets larger. So
Right.
these paintings could be 8 feet tall. But I get them so where I like the figures to be about 7 to 8 inches within them. So once I understand it feels right, then on the wall I'll just measure that distance, and then that will dictate the size of the painting. and then I cut wood, then I mount canvas, etc. And so what's interesting with with this body of work, a lot of the paintings, they're not round numbers, say 12 by 14 or standard stretcher size canvas sizes. They could be 18 and a quarter by 15 and three quarters.
Right.
They could be, 15 and an eighth by 17. And but it may sound silly to some people, but that eighth of an inch or quarter of an inch in scale really makes a big difference.
Right.
These are intimate paintings, and the scale of them is really critical to the experience as well.
You mentioned wood, and then you mentioned canvas. I'm assuming these are oil paintings. Is that correct? And
These are
are they all on canvas or
oil paintings on linen.
on linen? Okay, so you have how many of your paintings are going to be at the Sarasota Art Museum during this run of the show?
So the exhibition has 16 paintings, and within those paintings, most of them have one Vermeer, and two of them have two. So there are 18 Vermeers depicted within my 16 paintings.
Wow, is that all? Is that all you have? I mean, or are there more? Or
Is that
did you?
all? That's plenty. If I have to
Well,
paint, if I have to paint another little Vermeer face, I'm gonna go nuts. The Vermeer paintings in general are small scale paintings, and my
Yeah.
paintings again are anywhere from 12 to 16 inches. They're very small, and so the Vermeers within my paintings, the heads of some of the figures are. Well, I have a pen in my hand, kind of like as big as the tip of the nub of the pen.
Wow.
Yeah.
They're so detailed and they're gorgeous. And I got to tell you, I really want the listeners, number one, to do a little research because I think that kind of helps when they end up buying that ticket and going to the museum to see these pieces because it's almost like you're a voyeur, like if
Oh,
you're that person that goes to
definitely.
the airport early to watch travelers like I do, it's almost like you're a voyeur watching somebody watch something and you feel there's an intimacy to that, I think.
Mhm.
Is that a
Yeah.
little bit of what you're thinking of how people view art?
Um, yeah, I mean, it is an intimate experience, and especially the people, so the rules I set up for myself with the contemplation project is I generally want the people who are in the paintings that I'm depicting to be at those exhibitions, and so they may not necessarily be at that moment in front of that one painting, but they need to be there because
Right.
it's part of that shared collective experience.
Well, no, I think it's interesting that you
But,
have rules. I mean,
oh yeah,
most artists are like,
it,
"I'm gonna do whatever I want," but you just said, "I have rules," like, but
I
you're
have
the
those.
one
Yeah,
that made the rules,
they're my own. They're
and
my
you're
own
never gonna
rules. Yeah.
break those rules. That's
Generally not.
well, the creative process is different for everybody. I mean,
Yeah.
so
Well,
speaking
those constraints sometimes actually help. If you could say you could do anything in the world you want, it's too much.
So is that part of your inspiration? Where so a little bit of what do you call it? You know, um, you know,
Composition.
that you yeah, composition, but your structure, like you're forcing structure onto what you're doing, and that
Yeah,
helps you. The structure helps you.
totally.
Interest.
And so within the broader contemplation series that I've done, I probably have done at this point maybe about 100+ paintings. And with this series, I'm very conscious of not repeating. The challenge was not repeating compositions, right? Because the format is fairly the same. It's a painting and then people around it. And so I worked on the compositions all at once. So I had about in my studio at one point all 16 paintings, being very conscious of how one painting plays off of another,
Mhm.
and not making sure that the figures aren't necessarily repeating. And there was a quote by curator and Dan Cameron, who was talking about my work, and he said, "While there's a distinct meta quality of Fig's art, I prefer to see them as pictures of people in architecture, with the artworks as the key to how their bodies are situated within the built space."
Interesting.
So that's more like, again, sort of those formal qualities of that. And what I started looking at with these works, very much maybe similar to landscape painting, because there is the horizon line. There's a horizon line, which is the where the wall meets the floor,
Hmm.
and that varies in height. And then there's the artworks on the wall, which would be sort of maybe the mountains or the landscape. And then there's the figures, and if their feet kind of create a rhythm along the bottom of the painting, which would be maybe like a river going through it. And so
Interesting.
within those constraints, it pushes the creative process on how much on compositional elements and stuff like that. If that makes sense.
So, so you've done a series of these with different artists. Are they all artists that have passed, or do you ever do this with a living artist?
Oh, a lot of it is contemporary art.
Oh,
So
really?
being primarily or coming from New York, I often go up every 2 months or so. I have my gallery there. I have a lot of my other artist friends, and so and New York is still the capital of the art world.
Hmm.
I try to catch all the top, well, like, as many exhibitions as possible. And so many of them have been contemporary artists as well. Yeah.
So, do you ever see that look on their face? They're like, "Oh my God, he's here, and he's going to be replicating people looking at my work." And boy, I really don't want that. Have you ever had anyone be like, "I don't want that," or
No, I
okay?
had I I had one experience where, uh, well, actually another one where someone recognized themselves in it. But the first time I did that, I did a painting of a very MacArthur Genius painter named Nicole Eisenman. And so I was watching her exhibition at Hauser and Wirth Gallery in New York, and there was a man with three women, and they were, he was gesticulating and talking about the painting. I thought he was a gallery director. So I made a painting of Nicole's painting and then these four people in front of it. And then I posted that on Instagram. And I do not know Nicole, but I tagged her. And she wrote back, she wrote, "Oh my gosh, that's my brother and his girlfriend and his two friends," which was a big surprise. And then, so now I'm nervous. And they wrote back that they loved it. In fact, so much so that when we showed that painting at the ADAA Art Fair in New York 2 years ago, they came dressed in the same outfits and posed in front of it to get a meta photo of them
That
standing in front
is
of the painting.
crazy. I
Yeah,
I
it
love
was a
that.
lot of fun. They were thrilled. Yeah.
Well, are you going to be at any of the dates of your showing here? So is there potential that you're going to paint a painting of people looking at your painting?
Um,
And so on and so on and so on. It could be like this whole thing.
Coincidentally,
I know you're going to be around because I know you're doing a lecture of some kind and a book signing, I've heard, right?
I am doing we're doing a artist talk on Saturday, November 16th with a book signing after. But yesterday, Sunday, I was up at the Tampa Art Museum, where I also have some contemplation paintings on view through January 5th, along with some of my miniature sculptures. And so when I got there yesterday, there was actually a gentleman and his friend, girlfriend, taking pictures of him contemplating in front of, purposely standing in front of my paintings contemplating. But so I get there and I'm like, "Are you standing in front of my paintings taking a picture of contemplating?" And he's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "All right, first off, your pose is too boring." He was standing very still. I'm like, "Show some negative space."
You're not
So
supposed to
I,
direct people.
I sent him in front. No, and she's like, "Yeah, you're right." I'm like, "Be more relaxed." So he puts his elbow out. I'm like, "Relax your legs." And then he's looking at the shadows on the wall that it creates, because the shadows are also important. So we had, it was fun. I got some great pictures of that as well.
Again with humor, finding there's humor
There's
in what
definitely, I'm glad you picked that up. There's definitely humor in the work, and especially even with my miniature sculptures, there's humor because the detail, the detail is almost so ridiculous
yeah.
that, and the small scale that there's, I think there's a funniness to it. Yeah,
There's
and if I can make
so
one comment just about just the paintings
sure,
themselves. You alluded to
sure.
before. So we talked about the composition, and so what's nice for I feel with my process is once I have the composition, I know it's fixed, fairly fixed, and it's all about a good composition. So when it comes to painting, even though these are very realistic, detailed paintings, they're also very painterly. And once I come to painting, once I know the composition, then I could just have fun as a painter,
Mhm.
and using the sort of artistic license to, I love color, so they're a little overly saturated. Um, um, they're to Vermeer's to the best of my ability, but they're very painterly as well. I think painters, you would enjoy them as paintings as well.
I think the audience really needs to make sure they go to this. I would love to end with just a quick question about your books because you've written two books, and I would love to hear just a little bit about each of them if you have a second.
Sure. So the first book was called Inside the Painter Studio. And the brilliant thing about being an artist is a lot of things never have intention. And so those started off with when I was making miniature sculptures. And so my process was I'd go to an artist studio, I'd sit down with them and do an interview about their studio, their creative process. And often starting, as an artist, we go to museums, and we are expect to know everything about the artwork, right? We go to an artist studio, which is very intimidating,
Hmm.
especially some of the artists I met. And I'm not smart enough to go in and think of something smart to say. And so I was fortunate enough to come up with these list of questions where I start off very simply with, where were you born? How was your high school arts program? Where'd you go to college? Eventually, these are mostly New York based artists. When did you move to New York? How'd you get your first studio? How'd you set your studio up? And through that process, that gave me insight into their own creative process, and often into the work that they're doing now, which then I could see relationships to that evolution. Um, and so that was part of my process. And so I had an exhibition in 2006, which included miniature sculptures of painters' tables. But since I had these interviews, I included the audio within the work. And so you
Wow.
can go from painter to painter. And since the questions were consistent, you could listen to them talking about their own work in your head while you're looking at their work. Very sort of NPR-ish
Yeah, it's fascinating.
moment. And so anyway, that show did very well. And then that led to my first book, Inside the Painter Studio. And then a number of years ago, that book did very well. I did a follow up called Inside the Artist Studio, which incorporated not only painters but also sculptors, photographers, and video and performance artists.
Wow, this. It's so exciting to talk to you. I listen. I literally have like five more questions that we don't have time for, but I can't wait to go to Sarasota Art Museum. The For the locals, we all think of that place as the old Sarasota High School, which is
Yep.
right there on 41. And of course, we love Virginia Shear, the executive director there. She is just a dynamo and is making such great things happen there. So I can't wait to see your art, and I'm going to stand there looking at your art, thinking about how you would see me looking at your art. Is that okay?
That is okay, and just keep an eye out behind you. I may be there
Oh
taking.
my gosh! Oh my gosh! I want to be a piece of art. Yeah.
Yeah.
Joe,
Well,
thank you so much, Joe. This was incredible, and I really appreciate your time.
thank you, Jeffrey, very much for having me. And I also, just before I leave, also give
Yeah.
a lot of credit, or a shout out to Virginia Shearer, who's a very good friend, and has made a huge difference at the Sarasota Art Museum, as well as Rong Suk Yoon, the chief curator, or senior curator, who's been great to work with and also has become a good friend as well. Please, everyone, after there's other exhibitions at the Sarasota Art Museum, the Martha Posner, Larry Fink show that's up, as well as Claire Ashley on the third floor. Really great work. Please support your local arts organizations, and especially the Sarasota Art Museum and the other local museums here as well.
It's a gorgeous building. It's so beautifully renovated. It's spacious. It's fun, and I can't wait. And I can't wait to be there. So thank you, Joe, and thanks everyone for listening to Behind the Masterpiece. We love our conversations each week with our area arts practitioners, and we hope that you join us again real soon. So thanks. Visit Sarasota for caring, and thank you for listening. Take care. Thanks for being in our audience. I'm Jeffrey Kinn, Sarasota Rising Living Arts Festival. If you'd like more information about the incredible work that Visit Sarasota does, please visit them at visitsarasota.com. Thanks so much for being a part of our audience.